Hi guys, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to be going over the books that I read in June. I think I read 12 books, and then I did DNF one book. I'm going to start with the DNF and then we'll go on to the books I've read from least favorite working up to favorite. So unfortunately, the DNF that I had this month is Genuine Fraud by E. Lockhart. I think most people probably know this author best from We Were Liars, which I absolutely loved that book. This one just didn't hold me in the same way. I only made it a few chapters in. If what I understand is correct, then this book starts from the ending and kind of works its way back to the beginning. I couldn't really get into it because I felt like I was almost reading like a Batman origin story. But hey, some authors have books that you really love and then ones that you're not so crazy about. So this is just one of the ones I'm not crazy about. We Were Liars, I would say absolutely. Okay, next book, I think I'm gonna upset some people. This is the first John Grisham book I've ever read, and that is A Time to Kill. Oh, this book. I watched this movie. I absolutely loved the movie. I thought it was fantastic. The book kind of took away everything I liked about the movie, kind of like the morality of each character. So if you don't know, this book centers around the rape and attempted murder of a 10-year-old black girl in, I think, Mississippi. So there's a lot of racial tension. The story starts off with a bang, right into the action, right into the attack. It's very difficult to read that portion, which it should be. But as the book goes on, it just becomes about the ego of men in the book, the lawyers and the judge and even the father to some degree. With the movie, there was this empathy for the father, obviously wanting to get justice for his daughter, not believing that it could happen in Mississippi at that point in time for a black man. This just undid everything you like about any of the characters because none of them really care. I mean, obviously the father cares about the girl, but it's more about him, it seems, than it is about her. And then the main character, Jake Brigance, who is played by Matthew McConaughey in the movie, I hated him so much. He is just a lawyer, doesn't really care about anything except for how much money he might make out of it and how many times he's going to get interviewed, be on TV, get his name in the paper. It does a good job of showing how the justice system isn't ruled by emotion, but it does it in such a way that I lose any sort of, like, I'm not rooting for anyone even in there except for Tanya, the girl, like, and she's barely mentioned. Yeah. I don't mean to go off on this so much, but I was just surprised by how much how different this felt, I guess, than the book versus the movie. One of the rare instances where I think I do like I do like the movie a lot more than the book. So yeah. Next book we have on the list is No One Is Here Except All of Us. This had a really gripping concept, but the execution just did not work for me. So just kind of basic plot. This is set during World War II in a village, a Jewish village in Romania. They start receiving news of Jewish people being rounded up, being killed, other places, other cities being attacked. And they're surrounded where they are geographically, so there's no real way of escaping. So they decide that if we can't escape, what we're going to do is mentally escape. And we are going to start over. We're going to pretend as if we are the only people that exist in the world. And this is just going to be like a fresh do-over for everyone. So the bonds that were kind of set previously are disintegrated, and people decide that, hey, if you want to swap your husband or wife for someone else, you can do that. If you want to give one of your children away, you can do that too. And that's where the main character of Lena comes in. She is 10 or 11, and her parents decide to give her away to her aunt and uncle who are not able to have children. The aunt is just unsettling and kind of creepy, and she treats Lena, who is 11, as if she were a literal infant. She kind of like swaddles her and holds her and tries to breastfeed her and teach her words and stuff, and it's all really kind of gross, and yeah, it just made me feel really unsettled. I did not like those parts. But they decide what's going to happen is that, like, for every month, Lena is going to grow a year. The only issue is that once her real age comes, they don't stop. So when she's actually 12, she might be considered like 25 or something like that. Eventually, they are unable to keep up the pretense that this war is not happening. It starts to forcefully insert itself into their lives. And people get split up. Objectively, parts of the book are really beautifully written, but that's kind of overshadowed by the fact that nothing really happens. It's a very passive book. Things happen to the characters, but they don't really do anything. For as small as a community that this village is, there's no intimacy between anyone. They kind of all feel like strangers. The book does have a bit of a kind of hazy dreamlike quality to it, but it ends up being more confusing than anything interesting. And the characters are written at such a distance that it's kind of difficult to feel much for any of them. Again, the concept I thought was great, where imagination trumps reality, but it didn't play out for me in a way that I enjoyed. So that's this one. It's a cool title though. Next, I also might make some people mad, and that's The Stranger. This is one of those kind of classic literature books that I personally think is just way overrated. There's a man who ends up killing another man for no real reason, and he doesn't care, and he gets sent to jail, and then he's gonna be executed, and he still doesn't really care. And I know it's about this belief system, but it's very difficult for me to get mentally or emotionally involved in a character that doesn't care about anything. It's short. I just didn't like it. One of my friends loves it and gave it like 5 stars. Maybe I'm just not deep enough to get this book. The first line, I will say, is great. Mama died today, or yesterday maybe, I don't know. It's just kind of this like blah, this is the way things are because I guess that's the way they are. And who cares about it? And if I want to kill someone, what does it matter? Because nothing matters. And I need to care about something in a book. And I get that this is more about kind of that belief system, that way of thinking, than it is about the actual character. But for me, it's not interesting. It didn't do anything for me. So I'm sorry. I know a lot of people like this, but not my taste. Last month, I read the second book in this series, and I went a bit harsh on it. I'm going to try not to do that quite so much. So this is the third book in the series. I finally finished it. This is A Vow So Bold and Deadly. The reasons that I didn't like this book so much is pretty much the same as the reasons that I listed for book 2. And it mostly has to do with one character. Her name, I think, is Nola Varon. She has been raised in a society, a very harsh society, where kind of physical strength and power rules. Her mother's the queen. Her sister is a really gifted warrior. And she's neither. She's just kind of a sensitive, kind individual. Nothing wrong with that. However, this book is kind of, a lot of it is her journey to become queen. And there's no reason for her to be queen other than, I'm nice and I wanna do good, but I'm not crazy like my mother and I'm not bloodthirsty like my sister, so I guess that makes me queen. And she's kind of naive to the point of, I don't want to say stupidity, but she's very naive for supposedly the kind of world that she grew up in. She's very soft. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But I also would not want her to rule my kingdom because she's pretty easy pushover. She doesn't have any idea what's going on. She's fine to sit back and let other people make decisions, one character, Gray in particular, but gets offended when people think she's useless. The antagonist in this book was recycled from earlier. Not a very interesting antagonist either, just kind of evil for the sake of being evil. The characters that I enjoyed in book one, they kind of went in a complete 180 in this book, became something else entirely. Maybe I should have stopped with book one in this series. Book one, I did really enjoy. Book 2 and 3, not quite so much. This is such an awesome cover. I love it. And I keep talking about how premises are really interesting. This is another one where I read the back of it and I'm like, that sounds really crazy, like something I would love. And it just didn't turn into that. And that is the motion of puppets. Look at that cover. It's so beautiful. This is set in a small, quaint, kind of quiet, older town in Quebec where a newly married couple are staying for the summer. Kay and Theo. Kay is, I think, 10 years younger than Theo. She's an acrobat performing at the local circus. Theo is a translator. Instead of getting split up, he decides to move from New York to stay with her while she's performing. One night, Kay goes out with some of the other performers after work to get a drink. She never makes it home. No one knows what happened to her. So this happens really early in the book, only like 2 or 3 chapters in, so we don't get very much time with Kay. You would think that if you're going to separate the 2 protagonists that early, you're going to make some sort of an impact early on, showing that these characters are meant to be together. They're very cute, they're very loving, amusing, something where you want them to be reunited. Since Theo spends, I'd say, the next 90% of the book searching for Kay. That does not happen. Kay is, there's just, okay. This is where I struggled with the book just a bit, is there's nothing about the marriage really that's shown as good. Like, they're not beating each other or anything, but he is always suspecting that she's cheating on him. He's always worried about like the age difference. She is not aloof exactly, but she likes to be on her own sometimes. She likes taking random walks, and he's a bit controlling. Not terribly, but for as little time as they've been married, you think they might still be in the honeymoon phase, and it's just not shown as a great marriage, so you're not really rooting for them to find each other again. Theo spends, like I said, the majority of the book trying to find her. As it happens, Kay gets turned into a puppet from one of the local shops that she frequents. And the shop has been closed for a while, so all they ever do is look through the window. It seems like it's been deserted. The only way for one of these puppets, and there's quite a few of them, to return back to their old life is if the person they love recognizes them somehow. The parts where Theo searches for Kay is just kind of boring. Nothing happens except him wondering, oh, is she dead? Oh, did she run off with someone? Did she hit her head and she doesn't remember me? The police begin to suspect him, but there's no sense of urgency in anything. There's not enough romance in it for it to be considered a romance. It's not creepy at all to be considered horror. There's a lot left unresolved. I had such high hopes for this book because I thought it sounded like Toy Story, kind of like an adult Toy Story. And I wanted it to be a bit more magical, a bit more creepy. And it was just the majority of it was just a man wondering about his wife. Maybe I just put too much on this book. Okay, this next book, I'm not exactly sure where to put on the list, so I'm just going to put it here because I don't quite know what I think about it still, and that is The Yellow Wallpaper. This was written in, look at how short that is, 1892. It's a very early feminist work. It focuses on a husband and wife who moved to a house in the country for a short period of time to get away from the city because the wife is suffering from postpartum depression. The husband's a doctor. This is written in kind of snippets of her diary entries, and it becomes increasingly unhinged and paranoid and very suspicious as she becomes obsessed with the yellow wallpaper in one of the rooms. So short that it's really difficult for me to rate it. It's a nice short read, I'll say that. Nice short read. Next, A Woman Is No Man. This book reminds me a bit of Black Cake in that it's told from the point of view of 3 different generations of a family, the females in a family. These women are brought up in a certain community with certain values implemented in that, you know, they are meant to be very submissive and listen to the men and do what the men say, and they're told to behave in certain ways, and their worth comes from very specific things. And deviating from that, even when they move and they move like to the US, they're kept so isolated that it's almost as if nothing has changed. And when you read in the book that they're planning on moving, you think, oh, this is great, you know, they're going to discover all this freedom and they're gonna find jobs and they're gonna marry who they want, and it's not at all like that. It does a really good job of making you feel isolated and kind of claustrophobic. The cycle of abuse that happens is just completely infuriating, the double standards. You just want to like shake the women and tell them like, run, I promise there's better stuff out there. But it's just hopeless because it feels hopeless because this is how they've been brought up to view themselves and view the world. So it's so difficult breaking that kind of mental barrier. The ending was really hard-hitting. I will say the writing was pretty simplistic. I was expecting, just because I heard really good things about this book, it has really high ratings. I also rated it, I think, pretty highly. But that was more for the kind of an emotion that it portrayed than any actual, like the writing style, I guess. It was pretty simplistic, which is absolutely fine. But it'll make you feel angry and frustrated and sad, and it was a heavy book. So I quite enjoyed it. But sometimes with books like these, if you read too many of them at once, you're just like, oh my gosh, I need a break. I need to remember the world can still be a good place. Okay, next on the list, we have The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Just the first book. I think this contains 5 of the books. This one actually should be under this one. So let's swap those 2 places. This book I enjoyed. It was entertaining. It had some good puns. It was clever. For those of you who don't know, it's about the world being destroyed, an alien saving one of the men as his house was being destroyed, and the kind of trouble they get themselves into and the adventures they are involved in as they travel across the universe. I don't know why, because that sounds great, but for me, this book was just fine. Like, it was enjoyable, When I read, I like to feel. Like you gotta crush me. You gotta make me cry. You just gotta make me feel something for the characters. And this, I think, was of more entertaining value than it was anything else. I feel bad when I say a book was just fine, but when I say it was fine, like, I enjoyed it. I don't know if I'm gonna spend a lot of time going through the other 4 in the series. Next we have Her Body and Other Parties. This is a book that I started a few years ago. I think I finished one of the short stories and then I never went on. Finally got back into it, finally finished it. So it's a collection of feminist short stories. As with all such collections, some of the stories work for you more than others. I also found this was the case. One of the short stories was focused on kind of recreating potential SVU episodes. Wasn't quite fond of that one. I think my favorite was probably The Husband Stitch. I think that's the first one in the book, which is a retelling of the Green Ribbon. She does a really good job, I will say, of kind of inserting elements of dystopia and horror and magical realism and fantasy into it. This is one of those books where after you read it, you just kind of feel drained and tired and you're like, I need to move on to something happy. And luckily, the next book we have is a very happy book, and that's Howl's Moving Castle. Most people probably know this the best through Miyazaki's movies. Studio Ghibli films tend to romanticize the kind of simple things in life. I can definitely see why he chose this book to make a movie out of, because it is just as much about curses and royalty and magic as it is about spring cleaning and breakfast. The main protagonist of the book is Sophie. Very early on, she is cursed by the Witch of the Waste and turned into an 80-year-old woman. Now, most people would tend to despair at this. Sophie doesn't. She kind of sees the positive, the silver lining in every situation. Originally, Sophie was very shy and timid, kind of afraid to take up much space in the world, but after she's turned into an old lady, it kind of gives her boldness where she can boss people around and she'll say what she really thinks and she takes charge in a lot of situations. So it's great to see that shift in her. The other main character is Howl, who is a kind of notorious wizard, and he's known for eating the hearts of young, attractive women that he seduces and I guess kills and eats their hearts. In reality, as Sophie discovers, he is a very vain, childish character who has temper tantrums when his hair changes the shade, like a fraction of a shade. There's a grumpy fire demon named Calcifer who's amazing. And it's just a cast of really different, unique characters as they try to break some curses and they try to clean up this moving house. And it's about kind of everything at once, and it does a really great job of incorporating big elements into kind of mundane things. So I really liked it. I think there's actually 2 more books in this series. I don't think it focuses on Sophie and Howl. I think it goes on to other characters, but I would be interested in continuing this. Next we have The Glass Castle. This is a very complicated book. It's a memoir that the author wrote regarding her kind of chaotic childhood. Her father was an alcoholic. Her mother had mental illness, very much like a free spirit, didn't care for the responsibility of having a family. They're very poor. They're always trying to travel the country to keep ahead of the creditors that are after them. The dad always has a get-rich-quick scheme in his back pocket. They're always ready to kind of pick up and leave wherever they are without a moment's notice. They don't really have any roots as a family. Most of the book, they are in some sort of danger from the situation that their parents kind of allow them to be in, whether it's physical. Early on in the book, I think when the author was like 3 years old, she talks about how she was trying to cook on the stove and her dress caught on fire and she had to be rushed to the hospital for severe burns. Sometimes it's the people that the parents allow their children to be surrounded by, not so nice men who try to sexually abuse. One of the grandmothers attempts to sexually abuse the grandson. Not a great situation. And with things like this happening, you very much just want to label the mom and dad as bad parents. And objectively, if you go by the facts, they are. The author just complicates that by showing how much love is in this family, and it prevents anything from being cut and dry, and it becomes so muddied and so gray. A lot of what the book turns into is the children's kind of disillusionment of who their parents really are and their fight to get out of their situation to try and create a better life for themselves. It's very raw, it's very honest, it's just kind of heartbreaking, and it shows that like not even love is enough for people to face the vices they have inside them. The author's just kind of like splitting open her chest and like showing you all these wounds, and it's just, yeah, it's great. It's really good. It's really well written. Again, it'll make you feel some stuff. So last, definitely not least, my favorite book that I read in June, of no surprise, The Women of Troy. This is the second book in what I believe is going to be a trilogy. The first book, The Silence of the Girls, was also absolutely incredible, focused on the siege of Troy. In the second book, Troy has fallen, the Greeks have won. They are now ready to return home victorious, only the wind is against them. They can't sail. They must have done something to anger the gods, and now they have to wait. As with the first book, we focus on the female characters that were impacted by the siege, the city falling. So our main character, we have Perseus, who was originally Achilles' slave. She's now pregnant with his child, and she's been passed on to another man. We have Hecuba, who was Priam's wife, the previous queen of Troy. Her daughter Cassandra, who is the seer who's forced to marry, Agamemnon? I think Agamemnon. And then we have Helen. Pat Barker reminds me quite a bit of Madeline Miller, and not because they both write Greek mythology, but because they paint their world so vividly and they write so beautifully and poetically and clean, and they give their characters such internal depth that you just can't help but feel so much. Circe and Song of Achilles made me cry. Silence of the Girls and Women of Troy both made me cry. Just so freaking good. I think Pat Barker especially does just an excellent job of writing the aftermath of a war, the aftermath of violence, kind of the darkness that can swarm in after when the adrenaline is all gone and you've had to confront the things that you've done, the people you've killed, how you've changed from the person that you were before. She does a really good job of writing like PTSD pretty much. So I would definitely suggest this to anyone, whether you care about Greek mythology or not. It's absolutely incredible. And that's it, guys. Those are all the books that I read in June. I hope you did enjoy this. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll see you guys next time.